Thank you, Marion. You know, we advise our clients to let your lawyer do the speaking and don't get up and say anything in court. So I think I should just sit, rest, take questions. But thank you for that very, very generous introduction. It reminds me of something that Justice William Brennan used to say when he got similarly over-the-top introductions. He'd say, you know, I really wish my parents could have been here to hear it. My father would have been so proud, and my mother would have believed it. So thank you, Marion, for that. I am going to talk about, you know, we could talk forever about the range of threats that the rule of law is currently facing in the United States, but I'm going to talk about two in particular. And they are, you know, very much top of mind because in recent weeks, recent days really, we have learned not only that the United States is targeting suspected drug smugglers for summary execution on the high seas, but that on September 2nd, it intentionally targeted and killed two men who were hanging on for dear life to the debris of their boat after the United States initial assault. Kill all the survivors. At the same time, we learned that President Trump declared that a video made by some members of Congress who had previously served in the military that told members of the military that they are not obligated to follow patently illegal orders. President Trump called that video seditious behavior punishable by death on his social media account. So the FBI, you'll be glad to know that the FBI and the Pentagon are investigating, but they're not investigating the premeditated murder of the men on the high seas, but the members of Congress who told members of the military that they do not have to follow illegal orders, simply a statement of law. The rule of law has been under substantial stress since President Trump took office on January 20th in a wide variety of ways. He immediately dismissed all the inspectors general in the executive branch. They're the ones who take complaints from whistleblowers about fraud and abuse of authority. Well, we don't need them anymore. He hired a whole slew of loyalists. He pardoned everybody who was involved in the attack on Congress on January 6th to stop the peaceful transition of power. He has directed the indictment of the former head of the FBI, James Comey, and the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, on criminal charges merely because they have investigated him in the past. But the controversy, I think, over the military campaign to kill suspected drug smugglers and the attack on those who merely engage in speech in dissent from that illegal campaign, I think illustrates two of the most important, most critical threats to the rule of law that Trump poses. And one is, and I'm going to talk about both of them tonight, one is the assertion of emergency authority, and the other is the assault on institutions of civil society. And the reason I think those two are so critical is because in order to have rule of law, I think you have to have courts that can enforce the law against political officials who have been charged with violating the law, and the declaration of emergency powers makes that extraordinarily difficult. But you also, I think, have to have civil society institutions, the non-governmental institutions that include things like the universities and the press and the bar and the nonprofit sector and religion. These are all non-governmental institutions that give life to the the commitments of the community and provide an outlet for people to speak out, organize, and defend the principles that they believe in. So I think both his attack on dissent and his invocation of emergency power raise serious questions about the kind of long-term health of the rule of law in the United States. And the legacy of this period will, I think, be determined in large part by how courts respond to these emergency invocations and how we as Americans through civil society respond to the attacks on the many institutions that make up that civil society. So let me first start by talking about emergency powers. States of emergency have always posed a challenge to the rule of law because, of course, necessity knows no law. Once you proclaim an emergency, it is very difficult to rein in the powers that are asserted in the name of that emergency. And power tends to get centralized in the executive branch, and the other branches are not able to really hold it back. So, in the United States, we've seen many examples of this. In the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus so that people who were detained could not get a hearing on whether they were illegally or illegally detained. During World War I, Congress made it a crime for people to speak out against the war, and over 2,000 people were prosecuted for merely speaking out against the war, and over 1,000 were sentenced to serve criminal sentences for speaking out against the war. During World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of our greatest presidents, authorized the detention of over 100,000 people, 70,000 of them US citizens, simply because they were of Japanese descent. Not based on any evidence that they were engaged in anything wrong, any wrongdoing or espionage, but because they were of Japanese descent. After 9/11, President George W. Bush authorized the disappearance of al-Qaeda suspects into secret prisons run by the CIA called black sites, and of course, waterboarding of al-Qaeda suspects. And in none of those instances, really, were courts able to push back. Lincoln got away with it. During the First World War, the Supreme Court upheld the criminal sentences. In World War II, the Supreme Court upheld the detention of the Japanese Americans. And after 9/11, no court found that President Bush's authorization of disappearance and torture violated any laws. So in Trump's second administration, we are again seeing the invocation of emergency powers, except in the absence of an emergency. Right? At least there, it was in response to a civil war, world war, a mass casualty terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. Here, the emergencies are of President Trump's own making. And he has declared emergencies and invoked emergency powers in a range of areas, but I'm going to talk about just three examples. The first is the use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelans. The second is the declaration that we are in an armed conflict with drug transporters to kill people on the high seas. And the third is the invocation of a national emergency with respect to our economy and our trade deficit, which he has used to impose tariffs on essentially every country in the world. So the Alien Enemies Act. In March, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to deport about 200 Venezuelans to a notorious torture center in El Salvador. The Alien Enemies Act dates back to 1798. It's one of the oldest laws in the United States. 1798 is ancient history for us. I know it's recent history for you, but it's ancient history. And the Alien Enemies Act codifies a principle of I think, international law that says when a country is at war with another country, it can detain or remove nationals of that other country. But you got to be in a war with that country before you can use that authority. So it has been used by the United States in World War I to detain and perhaps deport. I'm not sure about that. Some of those who were nationals of the countries that we were fighting in World War I. And in World War II, it was used against Germans, Italians, and Japanese. It has not been used since then because it applies only in declared wars. We haven't had a declared war since World War II. We've had some wars, but they've not been declared. And the only other situation in which it applies is where we haven't declared war, but we are under attack. We are under attack. In that context, too, if a nation is attacking us, the president can invoke this authority. So, I don't know how up you are on the American military situation, but we're not in a war. There's no war that we're involved in. But what President Trump said was that there's this Venezuelan drug gang called Tren de Aragua, and they have attacked us. Now, nobody in America even heard of Tren de Aragua until President Trump announced that they had attacked us. So, if it was an attack, it was a very, very subtle form of attack. But he made that declaration, and on the strength of that declaration, ordered the deportation without any process whatsoever, no court hearings of any kind, of about 200 Venezuelans. Those deportations were enjoined by a district court, but nonetheless went forward, and there's a whole dispute now about the Trump administration's failure to abide by the order of the court. They've been held illegal by several other lower courts, but are still being the issue is still being litigated in the lower courts. The Supreme Court has banned the deportation of people under this authority until it gets to decide on whether or not the Alien Enemies Act is properly invoked in these circumstances. So, and it will require the court to ask, is President Trump telling the truth when he claims that this drug gang that nobody ever heard of is engaged in a war against us? Because if they can't question that determination, then there is no legal check on the president's deportation of Venezuelans, at least, and the only check would be political, and defending alleged foreign drug smugglers is not something that members of Congress are lining up to do. So the second example is targeted killing of drug smugglers, which I've already talked about. This is essentially an extension, but a very, very extreme extension of the Alien Enemies Act argument. In September, Trump announced, again on Truth Social, it's the official place for government announcements these days, that we are in an armed conflict with drug smugglers, and that he has authorized, therefore, the use of military force against them. And he shared very proudly a video of a boat on the high seas being bombed out of existence by from the air by U.S. military. He calls them narco-terrorists. Here too, he is asserting emergency war powers. And he has to, because there is no authority to kill drug smugglers. If you think someone's a drug smuggler, you can interdict them, you can charge them, you can try them, and if you convict them, you can sentence them. But even then, you can only sentence them to a term of years. The Constitution prohibits the imposition of the death penalty for any crime that doesn't include homicide. Here, the United States is not interdicting, trying, and sentencing, but simply meting out summary justice from the skies and making sure that the boats sink to the bottom of the sea so that there is actually no evidence for us to even know whether the individuals were drug smugglers or not. The victims, some of the victims have been identified by hardworking journalists, and it turns out that a number of them are basically fishermen who, in some instances, agreed to carry drugs in order to make some more money for their families. Hardly warriors fighting against us. And again, there is no actual armed conflict. The war on drugs is a metaphor. It is not real. It's just like the war on cancer doesn't allow us to, blow people out of the water who are engaged in cancerous activities. We are not authorized to blow out of the water people who are engaged in the transportation of drugs. If the transportation of drugs were the equivalent of an armed conflict, then we've had a civil war in the United States for a very long time, because drug smuggling is not something that is new to the United States. President Trump says, well, drugs kill people. That's true. So do motorcycles, guns, some pharmaceuticals, but that doesn't make their manufacturers or importers agents of an armed conflict that we can shoot like sitting ducks in international waters. Even in a war, even in an actual armed conflict, not a made-up armed conflict, but an actual armed conflict, a state cannot target civilians unless they are engaged in ongoing actual hostilities against us. If they're shooting against us, we can shoot back at them, but otherwise we can't target civilians, and that's exactly what we have been doing. But it's unclear whether the courts can stop this type of action. One survivor or relative of a victim has recently brought a suit this past week, but there are a host of jurisdictional hurdles to getting any sort of justice on this kind of question. And then the third example is the tariffs. Here, the president has used something called the National Emergency Act and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which allows the president to declare an emergency and then use economic sanctions in connection with that emergency. It's where it began was sanctions against countries, sanctions against trade with Iran or sanctions against trade with Cuba, but it has metastasized. Used against terrorist organizations, used against drug cartels in some instances, now by the Trump administration used against the ICC of all things. But in this instance, what he did was he declared a national emergency with respect to our trade deficit and asserted, therefore, the power to impose whatever tariffs he wants on whatever country at whatever rate he chooses. This is an emergency power. It has to be justified by emergency law, because under our Constitution, the president has no power to tax, and a tariff is a tax. The power to tax was given to Congress, not to the president. And the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which does give the president broad authorities during emergencies, says that he has the power to regulate or block imports. It does not say he has the power to tariff imports. It does not say that he has the power to impose tariffs on imports. Other statutes do give the president power to impose tariffs and explicitly use that term with respect to limited context under specific circumstances and the like. But those would require him to make certain findings, et cetera, and would limit his powers, so he's asserted emergency authority to do it at his will. That case was, that has been challenged by businesses who've had to pay those taxes, and the Supreme Court heard argument on it just last month. And there's some serious possibility that the court will, in fact, hold that this was an impermissible exercise of emergency authority. And when you look at what the courts have done generally in the context of the Trump administration, they have done a pretty good job. They have stood up to the administration, notwithstanding assertions of emergency authority. There are, to date, something like 150 injunctions against Trump initiatives by federal courts. Judges appointed by Trump himself, by Republicans, Democrats, have issued over 150 injunctions against the president. With respect to one particular measure, an immigration detention measure, which has been raised in hundreds of cases by immigrants who are being detained by the Trump administration, 225 judges in over 700 cases have ruled against the administration. 8 have ruled with the administration on its interpretation of this particular authority to detain immigrants. So the courts are doing a pretty good job. The Supreme Court, as I imagine you have heard, on its emergency docket, short-term decisions about what should happen in the interim while a case proceeds up to the Supreme Court, has ruled for the administration in almost all of the cases that the administration has taken up. About 30 cases, 2 have gone against the administration, 28 for the administration. But note, that's 30. There's 150 injunctions. So they are being selective about which cases they are willing to take up to the Supreme Court on this emergency docket. And how the court will act ultimately remains to be seen. The first sign will be the decision in the tariffs case. But the rule of law is cannot depend ultimately and only on courts enforcing constitutional or other constraints on the president, especially during times of emergency. It also, I think, critically depends on civil society. Every country in the world now has almost every country in the world now has a written constitution, and if you look at those constitutions, they look pretty good. A lot of them look better than ours. Ours is kind of looking worse and worse as time goes on, but they look better than ours on paper. But in many of those countries, that's where they stay. They stay on paper. And why is that? Because they often don't have the same kind of norm of independent adjudication, and because they don't have the same kind of robust civil society, institutions that are non-governmental, that have the authority and the resources to really stand up and push for the principles that are set forth in the Constitution. And our Constitution protects civil society in its First Amendment. The First Amendment protects the right to dissent, the right to disagree with the government, the right to associate, the right to organize with like-minded others in your dissent, the right to protest, the right to assembly, to go in the streets and protest, the right to report on government abuse, the right of the press, the right of religious institutions to be free of governmental interference, academic freedom, the right of universities to be free of governmental interference, and the right to petition for redress of grievances, the right to file lawsuits to challenge what the government is doing. So in many respects, one can think about the First Amendment as a protection for what civil society does, what people do in coordination with others, and that conduct and that engagement is critical to making the rights real. In many countries where autocrats come to power, they understand this, and that's who they target. They target the press. They target the nonprofit sector. They target the religious groups that are opposed to them. They target the universities. And oftentimes they are quite successful at doing that because that's where they know the resistance will come. Those are the institutions that are not controlled by government. Trump has done exactly that. He's gone after the universities. He's suspended hundreds of millions of dollars in research funds and other sorts of grants to universities on the excuse of responding to those universities' failure to address anti-Semitism in connection with the Gaza-Israel conflict. He has gone after law firms. He has gone after law firms, and again, law firms are a critical place for upholding the rule of law and standing up for principle and checking government abuse. And so what did he do? He targeted law firms expressly on the ground that they had filed lawsuits that he did not like, and they had hired partners who he opposed because those partners had investigated him, people like Robert Mueller and the like. He has targeted the press. He kicked AP, the Associated Press, out of the Oval Office press pool because they refused to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. He has imposed essentially a loyalty oath on any press that wants to be in the Pentagon press pool, which has driven all the organized press out of the press pool. The New York Times just filed a lawsuit challenging that action. He pressured ABC to suspend Jimmy Kimmel, a late-night talk show comedian, because he made a joke that asserted that the person who killed Charlie Kirk, the right-wing activist Charlie Kirk, was somehow associated with MAGA. He filed a suit against CBS 60 Minutes on the ground that they had improperly edited an interview with Kamala Harris during the campaign. Now, there is no one has a right to how CBS edits anyone else's interview, but he brought a suit against CBS on that ground. He's gone after the unions by declaring that a whole host of government agencies are national security concerned and therefore ousting the ability of unions to represent their members. And he has threatened to go after the nonprofit sector. He's come up with this term called domestic terrorism and threatened to go after people like George Soros and Open Society Foundation and a number of other organizations for supporting essentially political dissent. Now, were he to impose direct penalties on the basis of any of this, on these institutions, clearly unconstitutional. So in most of these instances, what he has done is not to impose a direct penalty, but to use the leverage of federal support, either federal funding or federal approval for various kinds of government, private business deals and the like, and threaten to withhold that if they don't change their tune. So law firms denied them access to government buildings. Pretty hard to do your job as a lawyer if you can't have access to government buildings, but that's what he sought to take away. Universities, on the charge that some students made some chants that he believed were anti-Semitic, he's threatened to withhold hundreds of millions of dollars of science and research funding that has nothing to do with what the students said or may have said. With the press, access to the Oval Office, access to the Pentagon, those again are benefits that he's trying to withhold. Approval of mergers is something that the government can withhold from the press and exercise considerable authority. So I think what this assault on the civil society sector has revealed is something of a paradox in our civil society sector. I think the United States actually has a very robust civil society. I mean, the American Civil Liberties Union, over which I was the national legal director, we have we're like Liberty here, except that we have a budget of over $300 million a year, and we have 2,000 employees. Liberty, I don't know, the last time I checked, it wasn't in that ballpark, right? And yes, we're bigger, but we're not that much bigger. There's a tremendous support for the various institutions of the United States, the press, universities, nonprofit sector, tax exemptions, government funding for research. All of this has played a part in building the robust civil society sector that we have. But Trump has shown that that is also very much a vulnerability of that civil society sector. If the civil society sector is dependent on government support, well, then we can threaten to withhold that government support in order to neutralize their ability to oppose what we are doing. Civil society has responded in a variety of ways. One university, Harvard, has sued to challenge what President Trump has done. 5 or 6 universities, including Columbia, Brown, most recently Northwestern, Cornell, University of Pennsylvania, have settled with the president. Notwithstanding the fact that he identified no illegal acts that they engaged in, he has reached settlements in which they've agreed to pay, on Columbia's part, $221 million. On Penn's part, something like $75 million, with no showing of any illegality. No showing of any illegality. Why? Because they're afraid that they might not get funding next year, or the year after that, or the year after that from the administration, and they're heavily dependent on government funding for their continuation. So Harvard challenged, the others have capitulated. Similarly with the law firms. 4 brave law firms challenged what the administration was doing. They went right to court once they could find lawyers who would represent them, because many lawyers would not represent them. Once they could find lawyers who would represent them, they went right to court, challenged what President Trump was doing, and got injunctions against what President Trump was doing. But 9 other major corporate law firms settled, and among other things, agreed to devote collectively between the 9 firms about $1 billion of pro bono legal services to support causes that Trump approves of. That Trump approves of. And the press, CBS, that 60 Minutes lawsuit that I talked about, where Trump says you violated my rights because you edited Kamala Harris's interview inappropriately, would have been dismissed in a heartbeat if it had gotten to a motion to dismiss. CBS paid Trump $16 million, because its parent company, I think it's Paramount, wanted to get approval for a merger with Skydance or whatever it's called. You probably know better than I do. So the fear of lack of government support led CBS to settle a totally frivolous lawsuit and hand Trump $16 million. It's basically a shakedown of civil society, using their dependence on government to try to neutralize their ability. to do what they are supposed to do. So I think, ultimately, the legacy of this administration and its impact on the United States going forward depends on how we, the courts and civil society, respond to these kinds of attacks. Do we step back and let him do what he is doing? Or do we step forward and say, no, the law is here and you've crossed the line? The record with respect to the courts I've given you, it's mixed. The record with respect to civil society is also mixed. But I will say this, I don't think we can rely on courts alone. I think in the end, it depends on the citizenry standing up and pushing back. And I cite for that proposition in closing a quote from Learned Hand. Learned Hand was a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit for a very long time. He has one of the greatest names of a judge on the ever to serve. Considered one of the greatest judges not to have served on the Supreme Court. But he was asked to give a speech in like 1940 or something at Central Park at a celebration for the naturalization of over 100,000 foreign nationals who were taking the oath to become American citizens. I mean, just think how different that is from the America today. And he chose for his topic the spirit of liberty. And in that speech he said, "Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no court, no constitution, no law can save it. While it lies there, it needs no court, no constitution, no law to preserve it." Now that's an overstatement. I think we need courts, we need a constitution, maybe you can do without one, but we need one. We need laws. They remind us of our better selves and hold us to our principles. But I think Learned Hand was on to something very profound, which is that the rule of law cannot depend on the people in this room, whether you're lawyers or judges. It depends on the people in the society at large. And if liberty lies in their hearts, if the rule of law lies in their hearts, they won't allow the executive to get away with the kinds of things that the president is doing right now. That remains to be seen. Thank you very much.